Okay, so I accidentally hit record before I was ready. Um, it's 4:33 in the morning on April 22nd. Um, and I was watching that overnight news. Well, I wasn't watching. I had just woken up, and I saw there was a headline: CEOs mull. I don't know how to deal with states with voter restriction laws or something like that. And I'm looking at the headline and I'm hearing her say it, and I'm like, CEOs mull voter restriction laws. And I'm looking at the headline going, this is not how it's supposed to be. CEOs, voter restriction laws. Those two things aren't supposed to go together. CEOs are supposed to run companies. They're supposed to decide whether there's clear Pepsi or cherry Coke or vanilla Coke or whatever. Um, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be in charge of products and employees and things like that. They're not supposed to be in charge of our government. That's a big freaking deal. And I know we've been sliding into a lot of things that aren't right. And I know people have been severely distracted by having this pandemic and everything. And people were, but the thing is, with the pandemic, people should be able to pay attention more in a way because they've been home, because they've been able to just sit there with the news on. Or, not everybody, because there's people who have been sick and everything like that. But the ones who are able to check the news and see a big headline like that, I mean, that's not hidden. That's a big headline. And it's just being reported like la di da. That's really 100% totally wrong. Now, look, I said during last year's election that anybody who is an American and sees themselves as an American and cares about freedom should have been concerned with anything that looked like voter fraud, anything that looked like a rigged election, whether they liked Donald Trump or not, whether they voted or not, whether they liked Biden or not, whatever their political issue. The most important thing as an American citizen or a citizen of any country should be that your election is real and fair. And if you see anything that says, hey, maybe it wasn't. Doesn't matter who won. It doesn't matter who lost. It doesn't matter how much you like somebody or whatever, how evil you think they are or whatever. Your concern as somebody who votes should be that your vote truly matters and truly counts. And if there's any inkling that something's up, you should have wanted to find out for sure that the right person won, the right person got the right amount of votes, and everything. It doesn't matter, because otherwise your vote doesn't count. Otherwise, the whole thing your society is built on, the whole idea of freedom, is right out the window. You know, because if your vote doesn't count, or if something gets fudged, or there's a bunch of fake votes, you know, that means your vote is worthless if it's being rigged by any outside entity. If there's, voter fraud going on anywhere, it means that your vote becomes worthless, because if anyone can rig it at any time, then and then your vote doesn't really count, then any nefarious entities, meaning bad guys can take over your government and do whatever they want if there's a way to rig an election, steal an election, do anything like that. So, because that's how our country runs, and that's what makes it free, and that's what makes any country free, is the people having a vote. Okay, because back in the old days, you had kings and queens and royalty, and people didn't get to vote. And the people up on the top, the rich people, the famous people, the royal people, were the ones who decided everything. And the only way, those people never got voted for. They got born. And The people on the bottom, the poor people, never had a choice. And that's why things were so bad. That's why people fought for their freedom. That's why there was, people left England and came here and wanted to be free. They came for religious freedom, but they also had democracy, and they didn't have, you know, I can't understand how anyone, any American, will not understand how important that vote being protected is. Now, on the flip side, excuse me, people now believe that in Georgia, they're making laws that are restricting people from voting or something. And that's in response to what just happened. If we hadn't had the kind of messed up vote that we had, that looked to people like a rigged election, that looked like an election was stolen, you wouldn't have what happened in Georgia, because then, on top of everything else, you had a whole country campaigning in Georgia to get certain Senate seats and House seats and things like that. And it was Georgia's business. But the whole country wanted to get the people of Georgia to vote a certain way so that one party would be able to have more seats in Congress and therefore be able to have a majority and do what they want, you know? And I know that people have talked that way before. I've never seen the whole country descend on a state, just like they were trying to flip Texas blue. And you had British celebrities tweeting stuff about to make Texas blue, which is absolutely none of their business. The people of a certain state should vote for the people they want. The people who vote for senators should vote for people they want to represent them, and that's what it should be about. It shouldn't be about, well, I live in state X and there's a Senate election coming up and I really can't stand that person, but they're from the party that I want to have the most votes in Congress, so I'm going to vote for them. That's not how that should go. But that's what we've turned everything into, and everything is about the national stage, and everything is about the big election, and it wreaked havoc on us as a country, spurred on by the media and grassroots people type efforts that aren't grassroots at all, that have, again, entities behind the scenes working them to get people to do a thing, and people wanting to be involved, and thinking that things are at risk. Rah rah rah, come out in force to do the bidding of these people they've never met and they don't even know who they are. But now I'm seeing that headline, and this is completely out of sorts, because CEOs shouldn't be deciding anything about elections. We vote, okay? And if people in the United States vote for something, or people in Georgia vote for something, or people in any state vote for something, that's what should decide. CEOs should not be deciding what happens in any state by using their money muscle to force legislation in or out in that state, because that's not that takes the vote away, that takes the choice away from individual Americans in whatever state. It takes away your vote and hands over the power to companies. This is so completely 100% wrong. This is activism gone insane, because this isn't activists. This isn't people. These are corporations. Corporations, no matter what Mitt Romney tells you, corporations aren't people. And there's been real I should have been concerned about my own life. I should have been like everybody else, and I should have been ignoring lockdown rules, and I should have been doing whatever the hell I wanted to make myself survive. But the problem is, I haven't been able to do that because I've been watching the outer context and what's going on out there in the world, and I can't just say, well, I'm going to shuffle and scrap for myself. World outside be damned, because you have to go out into this world, and the world outside is forever changing in massive ways during this last year, and it's being done by people who have locked us down, who have done all kinds of things to us that should not have been able to happen. They took away our freedoms a couple times already. They're continuing to try to take them away with things like vaccine passports and stuff like that. Again, that's not going to be something we voted for, but that's going to be something that changes our society if they go forward based on the idea that only, I'll give you an example. Like, say you were the kind of person who would want to go see, I don't know, Barbara Streisand at Madison Square Garden. Now, years ago, people wanted to go see Barbara Streisand in concert. They stood online, they waited outside, they called into Ticketmaster, they bought tickets, and they went. Then you started getting these tiers where they had VIP sections, and the Golden Circle tickets were $500. It was a huge amount of money where all of a sudden ticket prices went skyrocketed for these Golden Circle seats, because they would have some kind of like, not meet and greet, but some kind of like little thing before the show, and you know what I mean? These are the kind of things that would happen, and then you were like, as a normal person, you were like, gee, I can barely afford, a $50 ticket, and all of a sudden there's these tickets in the front, and those $500 tickets made all the other ticket prices go up. So nosebleed seat, you could hardly see anything, which used to be cheap, and anybody, even the poorest Barbara Streisand fan, could go. They were priced out, and it started to become, entertainment for not the elite, but people who either had a great deal of money or were willing to spend a huge chunk of their money to just go and see somebody they liked a lot. And then next thing you know, and this is where it started to get to be class war, on top of the tickets being a ridiculous price, then you started having American Express gold members or platinum members or whatever got to buy their tickets ahead of everybody else. So that meant, okay, here's the amount of seats, they cost a certain amount of dollars. Now only people who had the monetary situation to be able to have a American Express Gold Card or whatever the hell these things were called, only those people got first dibs. And it started to become a first class, second class, like on a plane or a ship for going to a concert. And I thought that was wrong. I was like, no, tickets should go, everybody should get tickets at the same time. Tickets should go on sale for everybody at the same time. And if you're lucky enough, and, like in any kind of normal lottery type system, if you're lucky enough and you have the money, you should be able to go. But this made it that only the most precious of Barbara Streisand fans had their choice of anything, had their choice of all seats. And what ended up happening in those situations, and I'm sure Barbara Streisand and all her ilk know it, is that when those first tickets went on sale, the tickets that went first were the cheap ones. So if you were a American Express gold member, you could buy. You're supposed to be rich, and so you should be buying those $500 seats, right? No, those people who had first dibs would buy the cheap seats because they didn't want to spend more money than that on Barbara Streisand either. And then people who didn't have a gold card member and who didn't have an exorbitant amount of money now suddenly either had to not see Barbara Streisand, or pay more money than they really could afford because the cheap seats were no longer available to them. They had to either buy seats that were really out of their price range. And that to me is, and I know that's a stupid example, but that, from my view, in the 90s, was when I started to see things become about the elite and the people with money and people, you know, making the world of their own. And as time's gone on, it's gotten more and more like that. As a poor person, I like to go to concerts, I like to do these things. I found a way. I was able to, if I really tried hard, the minute tickets went on sale, I was able to do things and get myself a ticket. You know what I mean? But there's a small window of being able to do that. But I would do my best to do that because even though I was a nobody with nothing, I wanted to be able to still experience life and do the things I would do if I were a rich person, just from worse seats, you know? So, but this was the first time I really started to see things become unfair and in favor of the rich in a silly way that they got to go first just because they were rich, you know? And that it wasn't, you know what I mean, it wasn't just the first class, it wasn't just the first class seats, you know, it wasn't just those seats that were too expensive. It was they got to choose first, meaning they got first dibs at the cheap seats and they took them. And so that, like I said, that drove prices higher. That made it like going to concerts was either for the elite or for people who were willing to, you know, spend a great deal of their money to see this person, whatever person, Jay-Z, J-Lo, anybody who has a huge following, who can demand high prices if they want to, you know. And that's where I started to see this stuff of the elites having a whole nother set of rules and things much easier for them. And society was allowing that new class structure that wasn't really a part of the world before. And everybody was okay with it. Nobody protested. Nobody said anything, you know. The poor people, I guess, didn't have a choice because it was like, well, just too bad. You're not good enough to go. You know what I mean? So, and I want people to understand, people who maybe aren't old enough. Before that, I mean, if you go back to the 80s and people went to concerts, the front row seats were not that much money. But in a lot of venues, you could get a seat to a concert for $16. You know what I mean? So for the poor people's ticket prices to go from like $16 to $85 in a decade may seem like nothing to some people, but if you look at wages did not go up in that way. So that's when I first noticed this elite thing happening and people just going along with it. Then you started getting cell phones and everybody had a cell phone and poor people were being forced to buy something that they couldn't really afford because other poor people who couldn't afford it wanted to look like Paris Hilton and walk around with a fancy cell phone. It was one thing for the celebrities to buy it. But when normal people said, I need to buy that really expensive item that I really can't afford because I'm a kid, I'm a 16-year-old, and I want to act like I'm fancy, so I'm going to blow, you know, 4 weeks' salary on a phone that I'm probably going to break. It drives the market, it drives the situation, it drives society toward rich stuff. And the more society goes towards you have to buy expensive things, the more things become hard for the people on the bottom. And that's market driven, but it also decides what a society is like. So what I'm saying now is these people, these CEOs, these people who've always been bloodthirsty, who've never cared about people, that was their arena and that was their way of doing things. So you had that situation where these people, like I said, the elite were able to go in front. The elite were able to go to a concert you couldn't go to. You know what I mean? And I'm using Barbra Streisand because that's a very big ticket, and the average Barbra Streisand fan would not go, would never go see that concert. It would only be the rich and the ones who it was so important to them that they would spend a great percentage of their salary to see this woman. But the average person who might like to see Barbra Streisand someday, forget it. They were never going to go see Barbra Streisand. That was over. So that structure was already in place. Now you have vaccine passports coming. And who are the people who are going to do that? Same people. Venues. The first even idea that there was going to be something like this came from arenas saying that maybe they will, the minute the vaccine popped up, they were like, well, maybe the arenas will open up and so that they can have fans go to, concerts or basketball games or whatever, and they'll be able to open up if people can prove that they were vaccinated, which means it's not yay everybody's healthy. It means, okay, if you're an anti-vaxxer, if you're a person who doesn't want a vaccine for some reason, you don't trust this vaccine even though you normally do get vaccines because you think it's new, or because you don't think that COVID is enough of a risk to you to want to risk getting a vaccine that's unproven. If you have that kind of thinking, then you're now going to be punished in that you are going to be in a class of people that are not allowed to see basketball games, concerts, etc. And that is another class system. Instead of just being rich and poor, then it'll be vaccinated, not vaccinated. And this is how, even without the stupid CEO thing that I just saw, this is how this pandemic is already allowing our society to be shaped by rules that no one is voting for. These are going to be rules for doing certain things and living a certain kind of life. And because they're not voted for, because it's not a law, because it's just, well, then don't go to a concert then. That's your choice. You know what I mean? That's a ridiculous amount of pressure on people to stand by their code and say, gee, I don't want this vaccine. That means I'm going to have to live less of a life. I'm not going to be able to travel. I'm not going to be able to go to certain venues. Maybe I won't be able to go to my job. And that's why it's not okay, because what's happening is that this is a turn, if you can see it, this is a turn from our vote deciding how our society and how our country is, to it being decided based on your wallet, based on money, based on CEOs now. Because if CEOs are going to go in and say, okay, well, we're going to take our business out of Georgia, or we're going to take our business out of this state, we are bullying that state to have the kind of government or have the kind of rules that these companies who are banding together, want. And that takes all the voting power away from citizens, and people need to understand this. And it's not okay. And it started with people, oh, we're going to boycott this, or we're calling on Coca-Cola to leave Georgia because of this and that. You can vote with your wallet. But what has happened over the last, I want to say 5 years, because everything seems like it's been 5 years. And it seems like it started right before President Trump, when he was running for office. But the boycotts to force a company to do a certain thing because a good number of people have a certain political idea. It's one thing if they actually vote for their wallets, but when they threaten to vote with their wallets, and they threaten and they make a stink, and they get on Twitter and they make a hashtag, and then the company makes a decision and no dollars were taken away, no dollars were put down, people weren't actually voting with their wallets, they were just making an uproar and a brouhaha. All of that could be bullshit. People could just be hashtagging but have no intention to stop drinking Coca-Cola. They could be, doing something to impress their friends that they don't really care about. And when they went to an actual voting booth, they would vote differently. But to impress people on Facebook or Twitter, they want to show that they have the hashtag so everybody can see it and all their bosses can see it if their bosses are a certain party. And this hashtag goes out and it goes with all the other hashtags, and then it makes a company say, we're not going to do business in that state because we don't like the law they just passed. Then everything's being decided by an hysteria created by people who want to be liked on social media, instead of people, true American citizens, going to the ballot box and voting and expressing their true opinion on how they want this country to be. And this is happening in no time. And this is happening during pandemic. And this is happening. I don't know why individual people are going along that. People fear for their jobs. People just want to be able to pay their bills. They want to keep a roof over their head. They want to protect their families. And because of debt, because of, how expensive things already are, people are being bullied and forced to really give up their rights just to survive and give up. And people who don't want the vaccine are going to get it just because they don't want the hassle. They don't want to have a problem at work. They don't want to, they don't want to lose their job, even though they really don't want the vaccine. You know what I mean? And I mean, just seeing that headline, it's an amazing thing. Inside myself, I know this is happening. I know we're headed again towards 1984, and I just can't believe it because, like I said, I read 1984 as a kid. I think I was in junior high. I don't think it was high school. And we all were forced to read that book, and we read it, and it was supposed to be so scary. You never wanted to end up in that kind of society where you couldn't think for yourself. Because there were thought police, and you couldn't express your opinions. So, to me, in public school, okay, reading this book that was decided by public school teachers that we should read it, and it was shown to us as children that you never want society to become this. This was put in my mind as a very young person, and a lot of Americans all over the country were taught to read that book in school. This is not something that some crazy Yahoo conspiracy theorists got us to read. This is a book we all read, years and years ago when we were in school. It was an assignment that we had to read, and it was to show us. And they wanted us to read it because back then they wanted to educate us on what horrible things could happen. So with all this dystopian things, 1984, The Hunger Games, I don't know, Handmaid's Tale, anything that anybody watched a movie of, or anything where it's a dystopian society, a lot of times the movie starts and it just shows you the dystopian society. It doesn't show you how you got there. And what you're supposed to understand, if your teachers taught you anything, they taught me, I think a lot of Americans were taught this back in the day. I don't know what's been taught over the last 20 years. I didn't have children of my own. If I did, I probably would know, and I'd probably be horrified. But what they taught us back then was you do not want to end up in the beginnings of Nazi Germany. You do not want to end up in the beginnings of communist Russia. You do not want to end up in a situation where things are stark and bleak and bad, and you can't think for yourself, and the government has way too much power. And so you don't want to end up in a society like in these books. But like I said, sometimes the book doesn't explain to you how you get there. This is how you get there. This is how it happens. And you can't protest once you're in the society that doesn't let you protest. You can't say, okay, never mind, I don't like this, I want my freedom back. You can't get your freedom back once it's taken away. And every little bit every time they chip away at your freedom, whether it's gun control, whether it's having a vaccine, anything that you can't say no. In your society, you can't say no, or you can't say yes to something you want or don't want, because they've made a rule that you have to do something. They've made a rule that without this passport or without this vaccine certificate, you can't go to a concert. Anything that says, okay, you're a member of society, but because you haven't done this, or because you have this political idea, or because you don't want a vaccine, or because you don't have enough money, you're not allowed. Because you're not in the right class, you're not allowed to go here. Because you didn't get this vaccine, you're not allowed to go there. Anything that says certain people can and certain other people can't, that's the beginnings of a totalitarian system. And those of us who recognize it is because our teachers did teach us, and we did pay attention, and we knew that it happens in an instant, and it happens because people give over emergency powers. There's a panic, it's wartime, or something happens, and people throw up their hands and they say, okay, well, we're going to let some of our freedoms go because we're scared right now. We need protection. We got to do this for the short amount of time. But then once this crisis is over, we'll all go back. It never goes back. It never goes back. And honest to God, some of us thought this after 9/11 with the Patriot Act. Okay? Because that was the first time where people were so scared that they were going to let the lawmakers just go right ahead and take away some of their freedom for safety. And that is the thing that makes you unsafe. And so this didn't just start with Joe Biden. No way. This we're at the advanced stage now. Okay? Joe Biden's just there. He's just there as part of this machine that's been chugging towards taking away our freedom for a long time. But the way it's happening sometimes is even shocking me. That headline, CEOs are mulling what to do about, I don't remember the exact wording, but the CEOs mull something. So CEOs are going to get together now. Understand, CEOs are going to meet, like Coca-Cola and McDonald's and God knows who, just all these big industry CEOs are going to meet and decide what to do about restrictive voter ID laws or whatever, states with restrictive voting laws. These CEOs are going to get together and use their might and their power and their money to decide the fate of certain states. That means these rich people who decide how much Coca-Cola you drink, or decide how much Pepsi you drink, or decide whether the price of a Big Mac goes up. Those people are going to get together, decide, if you wear flared jeans this year or not. People who just run companies that you already are being charged through the nose for their crap. Those people, they're going to decide. They're going to start deciding about voter laws in different states. That is absolutely 100% wrong. Companies should not be deciding any freaking thing. But because our world runs on money, that's what's going to happen now. In our vote, which everyone had, the richest and the poor had the same vote, and that's what made this country free, and that's what made real equity in this country. That's what made things equal, was that we all had that one vote. The rich and the poor, black and white, gay and straight, religious or atheist, everybody in this country had that same one vote. But by putting everything in the hands of the rich, the CEOs, they're going to muscle us out of deciding anything about our society. And that is a huge step. And if it just goes by as a headline and people don't get outraged, the average person, red, blue, purple, somebody who doesn't vote at all, doesn't look at that and say, they're bullying me out of my vote. They're bullying me out of my country. They're taking my country away and handing it over to CEOs. If you don't see that, if you don't see how that is a huge step in our society just being decided by companies. It's not even just billionaires. It's not just, the Jeff Bezoses of the world, the Bill Gates. This is companies. A company is not a person. A company shouldn't have a vote. But a company is going to go in and muscle a state into doing what they want, or they're not going to get their business. That should frighten people. I'm not frightened because I've already understood that we're on that road to the totalitarian regime that will allow us to not think for ourselves and not do anything for ourselves. And I already believe that our votes no longer count. So I'm not frightened. I'm just sad. I'd like to cry if I still had any crying left to do. Maybe I'll cry later on. It should be horrifying, but it's just the next step. And I'm so sad that my fellow Americans have not understood what's happening, or have not protested, or have already been so bullied by the system, bullied by their own bills and debt and the economic situation that we've been put in that apparently doesn't exist if you go by the media, that people have been so cornered and beat down already that they're not understanding what's happening. And they're not understanding that this is when we should be fighting. This is when we should be saying no. Before we are living in 1984, before we are living in these books, before we are. Because in those books, again, nobody has money. There may be ultra elites. Like I said, if you don't know 19, just you watched the Hunger Games, right? If you're not already rich, if you're not already the super elite, you're going to be one of the people in the Hunger Games. You know, you're going to be like Katniss. You're going to be like those people. Okay? If you don't fight now. Because once it gets to that, you see the control they have. Don't think your great-granddaughter is going to be Katniss and win the Hunger Games and overthrow. You don't want society to get to something that has to be overthrown. You don't want it to get there. And this is when it happens. This is how it happens. And it's been happening, honestly, it's been happening little bit by little bit for a while. But the real push came during the last election. And now to see CEOs get together, team up to try to decide things about states. CEOs should be deciding things about money and products. They should not be deciding anything about a state or a country. Because they're supposed to be a private company. They're not supposed to be deciding our government, deciding how we vote, deciding what to do about the laws that they don't like. Whether you think the laws are right or wrong doesn't matter. Okay? Because you're supposed to be able to do that with your votes. And you're supposed to be able to do that with your protests. CEOs aren't supposed to do shit about it. And if you think that your boycotts and your hashtags is getting the CEOs to do what you want, and that's great, next time the CEOs are going to do something you don't want. Because you're going to have shown them that they can use this power to subvert your vote. And down the line, when it's something you don't like, if you've allowed that CEOs and the elite class decide with their money what happens here and what happens there, when it comes to your state and it comes to your vote, your vote won't count. Your state, your what happens in your state will be decided by, I don't know, American Airlines. Who knows? Some company or a group of companies will get together and decide what happens in your state. And it won't matter who you voted for senator. And it won't matter who you voted for governor. It won't matter who you voted for local representatives or state legislatures. You know? And then it won't matter who you voted for president. Because these companies will decide if this starts happening. Which it looks like it's going to happen. If people just let it happen and act like it's just a headline. And people don't, have the jolt to the heart that I did when I saw that headline. If people don't understand what it really means, what it means for the future of this country, and people just are like, hey, okay, whatever. I'm glad because I don't like those laws. So go ahead, Coca-Cola. If you think that way, you're allowing something very bad to happen to your future, even if you agree with this one thing. Because later on, when you don't agree, and those people still use their power and might to take out your decisions or the decisions of the people that you voted for somewhere down the line for something you really wanted. You may remember back to the time that you were happy about it because it was Georgia and you thought they had restrictive voter laws, but you won't be able to roll it back then. You won't be able to say, well, they can't do that because you said they could do it this time. Okay? So I don't know what we can do. I don't know what we can do about it. But people at least have to acknowledge that this is not right, and CEOs should not, people need to make the same stink they make with their hashtags and say, you know what? This is not right. This should not be happening. CEOs should not be allowed to decide our government or to bully our government into doing what they want because they supposedly are acting on behalf of their customers. customers of a company are not supposed to decide local elections or local legislation. It's supposed to be our votes. It's supposed to be our votes. And if we don't have fair elections, and if we don't ensure that we have fair elections, and if we let the money decide, ask yourself how much money you have. In a room full of people, if the richest person decides, is that you? If that's not you, you need your vote to count just as much as the richest person in the room. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. And we don't have anything in this country anymore, and our vote's taken away, and we're going to lose our freedom. We can't do that. That's my alarm clock. So I'm done here, but please think about this.